Hi everyone.
Hi Sarah.
I'm Sarah Strickland, and I am part of the Greater East Grand Economic Council team that was helpful in bringing broadband to the Greater East Grand region and beyond. And we're here today and this afternoon to tell the story of how that happened, and to hopefully perhaps plant some seeds on how future collaborative projects across the region might happen. And so I'm really pleased that this panel is going to tell that story of how we got to where we are today. And Simon Thorne is with Fidium, and you know the famous Dwayne Young from the town of Weston and also heavily, or not heavily, but importantly involved in the Maine Municipal Association and with some important roles, and Kendra Joe from the Maine Connectivity Authority. And we're going to show you talk about the history, we're going to talk about the process, and take your questions about how this project evolved. So with that, we'll get started. And I think we're going to just sit. So Mike's going to go first. We have a few slides that can you guys see that? Yes.
Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the summit. As Sarah said, my name is Dwayne Young. I'm the Administrative Assistant for the Town of Weston. I'm also a board member on the Greater East Grand Economic Council. And I was the chair, started out as co-chair for the Broadband Task Force. Let me, if you will, set the stage for how all of this took place. So what you're going to hear may be a little bit of a repeat of what some of the other speakers have already said. The communities of this region have all seen population decline and a downturn in the economy over the past decades. Like most Mainers, we hunkered down when we could and moved on when we couldn't. Life keeps happening, but there is always that lingering hope of what if. Change started about 2011 with the purchase of over 6,000 acres of undeveloped land, most of which was waterfront. Conservation was, and still is to some, a dirty word, a foreign concept to many. With the conversations that followed, I believe a realization set in a handful of people that there might be a silver lining to this. An economic and recreational land use planning landscape began to form. Local communities and area landowners began to form partnerships. The school and health center started looking at capacity building for long-term sustainability, and a grassroots citizen group rallied behind rural education with an emphasis on our natural resources. Slowly, studies and projects began to produce results, such as the economic impact of a school closure, the curriculum development toward an outdoor education pathway, and Danforth's designation as a livable community. Soon, bigger things were underway to include the Portrait of a Graduate community project, Danforth Downtown Revitalization Launch, the conversion of 2 churches into community centers, and setting aside nearly 2 miles of waterfront for future development in the town of Weston. The citizen-designated area, now known as the Greater East Grand region, completed its economic plan and broadband planning began. Smaller accomplishments, like the farmers market expansion and the core-led student engagement recreational development, was also happening. Much of this was done during the pandemic. In 2022, the Greater East Grand region received, or Economic Council received its IRS designation, and the Elmina B. Sewell committed funds 3 years. Maine Department of Education and the Innovative Office Funds, the REV grant, and the Extended Learning Opportunities building. Conservation easements were secured on over 4,500 acres in Weston. The Confluence Project was completed. Danforth Livable Community Center opened up. Ground was broken for the new Danforth Pavilion. Public boat access and cultural projects are started. New subdivisions are underway along the waterfront in Weston. Restoration expansion projects to the Wood of Etlock Baptist Church and the Danforth Library are undertaken. I say this not to brag, maybe a little, but to point out that this broadband project is not a flash in the pan, but the result of an investment in the Greater East Grand region by its residents, local governments, nonprofits, and philanthropists over the last 13 years. Why this project was important soon became clear when the pandemic hit. We had a list of top 10 items. Broadband was at the bottom of the list. COVID raised its ugly head. School closed. We soon found out that, hey, I believe that the number was 90% of every student, of the student body, had access to the internet. That's great. We found out about 80% of that 80% was doing it on a cell phone. All right? Not a good idea. So that's when broadband jumped to the top of the pile. Why did we decide to do this? Well, number one, reliable and high speed is a key factor in our plan forward. And again, it was highlighted because of the pandemic. We're looking at this not only for enhanced education, telehealth, or the ability to work remotely, which is one of the key driving factors for this region because of the summer population that arrives here. That summer population arrives, may stay for a couple of weeks, then they have to go home and go back to work because they did not have adequate internet access to be able to continue. Starlink started to pop up in a few locations. Those people would stay. We saw this as an opportunity. But also, we saw this as an opportunity to enhance some of the online services offered locally. I know that through municipal governments, there are beginning to be a host of online services. Most places couldn't do it because we didn't have internet capable enough or reliable enough to do it. And though it's maybe on the bottom of the list, it's probably the one that affects most everyone. And that is a better multi-user home experience. There's nothing worse than sitting down to stream Monday Night Football when there are 4 kids playing on and the TV goes up. But that is why we did this and the history leading up to it. So again, this is not a flash in the pan. There have been great investments by numbers of people, many of which are in the room today, to make this happen. And that, I'm going to hand it off to Sarah.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Thanks, man. I'm going to switch the script on the panelists a little bit here and jump to Kendra and Simon before I get on to my part. And okay, are you guys ready? Yeah, good. And part of what it would be a mistake to think that the Greater East Grand region could have accomplished this endeavor without Consolidated, now known as Fidium, and without the Maine Connectivity Authority, fondly called MCA. And having the 4 of us at the table here is representative of the public and the private investment that this project is all about. And so Kendra and Simon, I'm wondering if you could set the context, as Wayne has done, for the local efforts that have led to this end result that we're celebrating today, about what Fidium consolidated and the wonderful Sarah Davis showed up at the table. But people have always asked, why was Fidium interested in this area, right? Why invest here and partner with this group of communities? And Kendra Jo, where in the mission of the Maine Community Authority does this part of Maine, this kind of rural, remote Maine, how does that figure into MCI's goals and vision for the state? So I think I'll send Kendra over and then come back to Simon.
Thank you, everyone. As I was telling Elaine Abbott and others earlier, not my first time to Danforth, but I couldn't tell you how I got here because it was different. It's different every time. Thank you, everyone. I'm Kendra Jo Brindle. I'm the Director for Community Strategy at the Maine Connectivity Authority. We're a quasi-state agency tasked with distributing the state and federal funds charged with broadband connectivity. When we talk about broadband, today I think it's really critical to think about broadband in terms of the way the state of Maine has set it, which is speeds of 100 megabits per second download, 100 megabits per second upload. We as a state agency dealing with federal funds have to recognize that Maine is ahead of the curve in setting a definition that high and sustainable, because the federal definition is less with 100 over 10, or 100 over 20, sorry. And our funding from the federal government requires that. But for today, with the funding that we were able to distribute to this project, I think it's right place, right time, right partnership, all the things coming together for a region of this size to plan, to stay together with really clear leadership, with a focus on goals that were set by the community, set by those that make decisions, your municipal officials, community leaders, right? It's really important when we look at how broadband has shaped itself over the last decade in Maine to consider the fact that when the previous authority, the Pennsylvania Authority, didn't have funding, didn't have staff, it was a state agency of 2 staff members, they had to rely heavily on communities and community partners and regional planning offices and those organizations that had the capacity and could get access to funding and could stand up and stand down committees and conversations around what's the problem and why do we care, and rally a community around this really being a problem that it's not a privilege to have access, it's not a luxury or something that you get it if you can afford it, or you get it if you live in a certain area. It really shouldn't be that way. We should have the choice to disconnect, not have the choice taken away from us to even try. And so when we look around the state and over the last 10 years, we were really pushing for regions coming together. If we tried to do this approach one community at a time, we'd probably still be in our first 50 communities. But having regions collaborate, having economies of scale that interest private partners, having the opportunity for communities with shared economies, shared goals, shared barriers, and issues at the table, or priorities even, is really helpful. Having communities that already knew how to talk about the hard things together because they worked through it with utility districts or transfer stations or schools. It's hard when you have communities coming together who have never talked about money before. People don't feel comfortable doing so. They've never had to say, well, you're a bigger community, you have to put in more. You're a smaller community, you put in less. So having communities that could rally together because they had a shared infrastructure and a shared vision and a shared goal is what allows communities to stay together through those hard times, and what turned out to be some really many years of planning, many years of conversations. From a main connectivity authority standpoint, it wasn't until we were established and had bond funding, which hopefully you all voted in 2020 to approve $15 million bond to fund internet connectivity across the state. That was the first infusion of what I kind of think was like real money. We weren't talking in $500,000 to fix a $600 million problem anymore. We're talking about $15 million to fix a $600 million problem, which is, we had money. We were so excited. And having that money allowed us to focus on regions and focus on multiple communities at once. And I think it really speared communities and private partners coming together and saying, there's still a $600 million problem, so how are we going to make sure that MCA and the scoring and everything else is competitive enough to where we're at the front of the line of that $600 million problem. And for Greater East Grand and the years of planning and clear process, clear initiative, clear partnership, it was the right place, right time, right amount of money to say we can invest in a project of this size. And in a place where we hadn't had a lot of community organizing around broadband. To date, that, at the time, it had really been islands and along the coast, because they were the ones that had the capacity and had the partnerships to raise their head, and we're really thankful for that. But it was harder to have the conversations inland and as you work north. And it's still where we see a majority of the unserved problem across the state. We have 28,000 Mainers without connectivity that are unserved. When we look at the maps of what that looks like across